Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to a, awesome interview with Phil Szostak. Hello.
Hey, hi, how's it going, Marie Claire?
Good. I don't normally say like how long these things take to come around, but I feel like this one was
Yes.
like a year and a half. Because originally, like
Yeah.
I reached out to you, and then there was like they said no, and then we waited until
hmm
the Art of Books, and we were kind of working on it because you're kept under wraps. You're like a secret
I
weapon or
am.
something special.
Maybe. I like that idea, secret weapon. Yeah, and I actually made a list of everyone who reached out to me, all the podcasts,
hmm
and kind of kept it in order of when people contacted me. And you guys, you were on the top of the list. So I made sure to reach out to you again and let you know that, now is a good time. So
Yeah.
I'm glad we could make it happen finally.
Yeah, I'm so happy that, we kept in contact and we were able to make this happen now that the
Yeah.
Art of Book is out and the third trilogy is done.
hmm
You can be like, yes, we can talk about stuff. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Finally
So,
free.
yes, well, free-ish. You're still in your role
It's true.
and
It's true.
and
As
everything.
free as I can be. Yeah.
Yes. So your day job is Lucasfilm's creative art manager, although interestingly, Google lists you as an archivist.
Oh, yeah. That was actually my old position. Um, so I was the kind of like an assistant slash coordinator in the Lucasfilm art department for The Force Awakens. So I was like embedded with all the concept artists. And that was
hmm
back from I think I didn't really start there until the summer of 2013, but then kind of straight through until post production. But that as soon as that kind of wrapped up, they had already started moving on to Rogue One, and I bounced into the asset department, which is kind of the folks that handle distribution of photography and art and all that stuff to different external partners and internal teams.
hmm
So for a while, I was kind of handling concept art in that capacity. So that's when I was kind of that archivist role. But I've since transitioned out of that back into the art department for the last 3 or so years. So, and I have this new title of creative art manager, which doesn't really tell you a whole lot about what exactly I do. It's a pretty vague wording, but I mean, there is some something to be gleaned from creative art manager. It's a multifaceted job, and it's definitely dealing a lot with concept art, of course, and working with all the artists, the amazing artists in as a part of Doug Chang's team at Lucasfilm.
hmm
So it's definitely filling a role there as far as making sure the artists have whatever reference they need and making sure that everything's aligning with Star Wars canon as far as like the visuals go.
hmm
Of course, Doug does a great job of that as well, but I'm there to support him and everyone else. But then I also serve a similar role for production. So different department supervisors on, let's say, The Mandalorian or one of our films at Pinewood will reach out to me. And if they're looking for a specific blueprint or if they want some more information about how something was done or photo reference or art reference or just real world reference, including like location photography and things like that, something I'm always there for all those folks. But then there's more. Then I also review a lot of publishing materials like comic book interiors. Every week I look at book covers along with the story group and folks within the publishing department.
hmm
And then, of course, as a side job, I write these books. Yeah, and I also handle some distribution of concept art as well. So yeah, it's a multifaceted job.
You're kind of like this like weird. I'm gonna use the word fulcrum because it exists in the
Ooh,
world.
I like that.
But you're
I'm
like
gonna
this
throw.
weird fulcrum. And like in your Nerdist interview, you said you're the design continuity guy.
hmm
It almost gives a feel of the story group, but from like a visual and like how things look and feel
For
from an
sure.
art perspective.
Yeah, but at the same time, my role isn't to kind of tell people like what the Star Wars aesthetic is per se, unless they kind of ask that specifically, like my
Yeah.
opinion on it, because we don't want to squash people's creativity either. And there's always room for the aesthetic to expand a bit. We don't want to
More sand in the sandbox, right?
exactly, yeah, we don't want to
Yeah.
limit people's creativity by telling them like, no, 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 that's not Star Wars. But then there's egregious cases where something is clearly
Like,
not Star Wars, and
oh.
we have to like kind of like, hey, whoa, whoa. But yeah, generally speaking, it's the same with the story group too. It's like we're not there to kind of dictate
Mhm.
other people's ideas, dictate other people's creativity, and we want the artists that we work with, the comic book artists, the filmmakers, the concept artists, and we have freelance concept artists as well as in-house artists. We want them all to be free to kind of play in the Star Wars sandbox and have fun and kind of push the limits a little bit sometimes. It's Star Wars doesn't always fit neatly into a box. And I think George did an amazing job kind of expanding what Star Wars could be aesthetically with the prequels. Obviously, I mean, people saw, back in '99, saw episode 1, they were really like, I think that was a bit of a shock to the system for a lot of Star Wars fans, just like, whoa, Star Wars can be like this, it's like an even kind of higher fantasy and, something with a more romantic feel rather than kind of the gritty Star Wars.
Absolutely. Anything to do with Naboo, right? Like
that
was so, I don't know, new for everybody who had existed previously in the original trilogy time or the first trilogy with the, analog aesthetic. Analog lived in, bashed up, kit bashed like version of the world.
Precisely, yeah.
Now we have like smooth ships and we have like clean lines and, it was almost very alien to many original trilogy fans who then were like, what is this? This is But I am endlessly thankful for when we get something that's new, but yet still somehow feels like Star Wars, but it's completely new. Like the best example I have is the music for The Mandalorian.
Oh yeah!
By
oh my God, Ludwig's work. Yeah,
oh my gosh!
Yeah, I'd actually, I was lucky enough to have access to the episodes before they aired, and I could just watch them at any time on my computer at work. And I was kind of just watching them over and over again, like especially like the end credits, not just because it was such a beautiful and amazing showcase for the concept art team, but also the music. I mean, the music, like I love the main theme, and it would get me emotional, like listening to it. Especially initially, I was like, oh my God, this is so good. Like, and it's so different than what John Williams did. It's still like so Star Wars in a way that's like, I mean, I'm not a music guy, so it's hard for me to define, what exactly that is, but
the same thing happens,
felt so right. Yeah.
Like with the art, with the design and all of the different, groups that you work with, which I love that you highlighted in The Rise of Skywalker, as opposed to almost going, it was more the subject or timeline wise with the other two books that were in the third trilogy here.
Yeah, and that was very intentional. And I've said this elsewhere, but I really saw this book as a way of kind of just a round of applause for those teams for like 6 years of really hard work. I mean, I don't think people realize quite how much work. I mean, you see it in the documentaries and stuff to a certain degree, but it is really nuts. Like, I was friends with, I continue to be friends with Jonathan Rinsler, who wrote the making of books and the art of episode 3, and amazing writer that I'm sure all of your listeners are familiar with. And, we'd often go grab some lunch and, talk about just filmmaking in general. And he often said, it's like, making a movie can kill you. It is like an intense amount of work for years, just endless, decisions being made, but also just exhausting because the hours are super long. And I mean, and the pressure is really extreme. Like, it brings me back to when I was, working as a coordinator with the art team on The Force Awakens. I mean, the amount of work that they were producing and the pressure that they were under, it was intense. And I was feeling it, like, even though I wasn't, producing art every day, I was just kind of supporting them. I mean, it's nuts. So, I really wanted with this book to not only kind of, highlight their work and kind of by department show like what each team was responsible for and who the players are. Because if it's all kind of jumbled together, it's sometimes hard to tell, like, what each team is responsible for and who the players are for the individual teams, because it gets especially confusing with the creatures department, because the creature department designs the creatures, but then the costume department designs the costumes for the creatures.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll see a piece by like Adam Brockbank, if he's in the costume department, that's a costume design for a creature that, say, like Jake Lund Davies designed, and it's confusing, So there was quite a bit of that actually on Rogue One, as I recall, that Adam did amazing costume work on Rogue One, and a lot of those pieces. And you'd think like, oh, he designed that creature, but no, he just designed the costume, and then someone else designed the creature. So I just wanted to try to clarify that to a certain degree with this book, but also just highlight the amazing work that these teams have been doing for all these years on not only the sequel trilogy, but Rogue One and Solo. So yeah, it's actually nuts to think that to think back to 2012 when all this began and kind of how humbly it began, with just a handful of people, and here we are in 2020. It's pretty amazing body of work, and and it's only a fraction of it too. That's what's also crazy. There's only several hundred pieces in these books, and there's thousands more in our database that have not seen the light of day.
So is there a name for your database? I know that like the nickname for the continuity database is the Holocron.
Yes.
But what is yours?
It does have a name. I don't know. I'm kind of reluctant to say because I don't want people finding the the page. We work with a lot of web-based systems, so I'm kind of reluctant to say, to be honest. But
I was just wondering if it had a nickname rather than like the actual URL or anything.
It doesn't really have a nickname. It's the same database that we keep all of our photography in too. So for each film, and there's a production side and a franchise side. Mm-hmm. The production database being what the actual filmmakers use on a day-to-day basis to put their, in the case of concept art, to upload their concept art so that it can be shared. And that's kind of what I'm tracking as a film's being made. But then the franchise side is all the stuff that's produced for the wider franchise, which includes studio photography and set photography and behind the scenes photography and concept art as well. So when I make my selections for one of our books, that goes into the franchise area as well. So it can be shared with websites that are going to, help promote the book, or StarWars.com articles. So, I kind of winnow this huge pool of art down to, however many it is, 650 pieces for one of these books. And that gets put into that franchise database. But it's just a ton of stuff. Yeah, so for our franchise database, just photography and that small amount of art alone, it's, I think, for each project, well over 100,000 images. So
there is a name. You don't want to tell me. It's super secret. That's okay.
Yes. Sorry. It's not that exciting. It's certainly not as interesting as Holocron.
Trust me. It needs a cool in-universe name. So
it does.
I'm just gonna put that out there and be like, we have the Holocron. Is there a version that, like maybe it's the Holo Archives or something like that? That would be really cool. But I don't know. Somebody will come up with a brilliant name.
Maybe it's my responsibility as the fulcrum. I need to come up with a name for this database, put up the fulcrum sign, and think about it. Yeah, no, I'm sure. Yeah, that's not a bad idea, to be honest, because its actual name is quite boring. But anyway,
you need a code name.
Yeah,
who's really good at naming things at
Pablo. Pablo is really good.
Knock, 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 virtually, of course. But Pablo, what's the name for this art?
Just in a meeting with Pablo earlier today. Yeah, no, he's the name master. He's all of those character names and ship names and everything that you see in his visual dictionaries are things that mostly that he's come up with. Although he does collaborate with the filmmakers on those names as well. He'll send JJ or Ryan or whomever an email and say, "Hey, is this name cool? Or do you have any ideas for these things?" And I know that Ryan came up with a bunch of. I think he may have come up with the Mega Caliber 6, the Walker name for, which I think is a hoot. It's just kind of like Mega, It doesn't get much bigger than Mega. So anyway,
the Gorilla Walkers.
The Gorilla Walker, the technical name, but even just Gorilla Walker is cool.
You've talked about specifically in the Rise of Skywalker, showing the art of and showing the different departments. But why are the art of books so important to share with us? Because a lot of work goes into the art, the behind the scenes, all of the creation. It's ideation visually almost. Why is it important to do these books and to share them with the fans?
A big part of it, just for me, is the legacy of this book series, because it was something that, of course, I was a fan. I've been a fan since I was a kid. I'm old enough to have been an adult when the prequels came out, and was a child when the original trilogy came out. And the art of Ralph McQuarrie made a huge impression on me even as a kid. And it was, when I interviewed Rian Johnson for the art of The Last Jedi, we definitely bonded over, we're a similar age and bonded over being a kid at that time. And it's kind of like a bit of an alternate universe version of Star Wars. Ralph's work wasn't obviously always one-to-one because he was defining it before the film was made. So yeah, it's just an important legacy. We need to kind of continue to move that forward, and it's been great that that's been consistently happening. There's been a book for every one of our film projects, and our animated projects and game projects as well. So yeah, I feel the weight of definitely a lot of weight in that responsibility of carrying that legacy forward, because those original art books for Star Wars, A New Hope, and Empire and Jedi are it's what got a lot of the artists that you see in my books into the business in the first place. They were inspired by people like Ralph and Joe Johnston and Milo Rodas Romero and John Malo and all those amazing artists and filmmakers and craftspeople on those original films. So I like to think that, we're inspiring a whole other generation of artists who will be here long after I'm gone, to continue to, make amazing films, not necessarily Star Wars, but I like to think Star Wars will continue on forever. And, there'll be another crop of artists who are inspired by possibly one of my books. And that's really important. Also, just the art of concept art in general. Like, what is a concept artist? Helping people to kind of understand how important it is in a film like Star Wars to have people like, Doug Chiang or Ralph McQuarrie or, any of these kind of legendary concept artists to really set the visual tone. Without those people, there is no Star Wars. Because you can't just go out in the world and film Star Wars, without it. All needs to be designed, because none of it exists in our world. Except for obviously the amazing locations that we go to, like Skellig Michael for Octo Island or Tunisia for Tatooine. But even those need to be augmented and enhanced, to bring them into the Star Wars world. So yeah, Star Wars needs concept art. It needs concept artists, or it doesn't exist. It's important to kind of highlight that work, and hopefully people understand kind of that it's not just about like making beautiful illustrations for a book of Star Wars. It's about designing Star Wars. It's about creating Star Wars. And it's something I honestly took a long time for me to kind of understand, because you see a beautiful Ralph McQuarrie painting that looks almost one-to-one with an image in the film. And you think, oh, he just painted what was in the film, But no, the film matched what he painted. It's the other way around. It's an important thing to highlight. And it's one of the very first things that happens in a Star Wars film, in the filmmaking process. Concept artists are there right from the beginning. And their work is integral to the finished product.
So it all starts like pre-production. Can you walk me high level through the steps of like how it goes from concept art, which you said is like one of the first things, other than, hey, we've got an idea, through like where it ends up, because there's even post-production concept art that's done, especially for ILM. And I really appreciated how you talked through that in The Rise of Skywalker, because it was like pieces I'd known, but like I didn't know, because it's never laid out that clearly. But can you talk a little bit about kind of the high level, like how the concept art comes in at different stages?
Sure. Yeah. It's literally script to screen. And yeah, I'm really grateful, in choosing this format for this book. It really kind of highlights that. Although, also in The Art of the Force Awakens, it's kind of made pretty clear, because that just goes chronologically through from the beginning.
Kind of shows all the ideations, which is really fascinating too, in a different way.
And that book provided more of an opportunity, and that's something I can talk about a little later, perhaps. But like with The Force Awakens, it was really about kind of like, what is Star Wars now? It was answering a much larger question initially. What does Star Wars look like after all this time? What does it look like 10 years after the previous movie, or 30 years in universe since Return of the Jedi? Like, what does that even look like? So the sky was the limit. The blue sky period was literally, it was like, let's see how far we can push this, and just come up with some pretty wild ideas. And so, but once that's defined, then they're not going to go through a similar period for The Last Jedi, for example, because it has the first film to build upon. Mm-hmm. But anyway, in the very beginning, and this was something that George Lucas did from the very beginning with people like Ralph McQuarrie and Joe Johnston. As he writes his scripts, he is looking at concept art. He's telling ideas to, Ralph or Doug Chiang or whomever, and just feeding them little story tidbits and having them go off and illustrate what they're imagining. and then George sees that art, and that feeds into the script. So it's this back and forth process, and that was definitely something that happened right from the get-go in, late 2012, early 2013 with The Force Awakens. JJ and Rick Carter definitely wanted to continue that process and work that way in order to kind of find the film. So it's great because, they had the time, they had the budget, they were willing to put in that kind of time to really develop this story in kind of an organic way. I was lucky enough to work with George for a few years up at Skywalker Ranch, running his art department up there. And George one time described the process to me as it's like you're in a really dense fog, and a shape emerges, and it's like the way that you find a film, the way you define a film too, it is like a shape emerging from the fog, and it gets slowly more defined, and the fog lifts, and so it's like in sharp, full color, and you can really see what it is. Mm-hmm. But you have to be patient because it takes time, and you have to, do a lot of ideation, and each design needs to kind of be
iteration
explored. And
too.
Iteration is a huge part of the process. And sometimes, depending on schedules and budgets, you don't have that kind of time on every film. And we were lucky enough to really and consistently have had time to kind of explore those things. So those are the early days, and that's when you see the kind of really wild stuff. And not all of it is based on a story idea. Sometimes the artist will just come up with a one-off weird idea and just pitch it and be like, visually, just like, what about this? And some of those ideas make it into the final film, and some of them don't. But I like to include as many of those as I can in the books.
I think that's where some of the confusion comes from. Like, there was these early ideas, or there was like, we were playing around with story feedback loop in a way. And I'm thinking specifically like the Darth Maul costume designs from Revenge of the Sith, and like how different he looks in different like concept ideas.
Yeah.
And eventually
that was that was just George saying, like, draw me the scariest thing you can think of,
Yeah.
It was very vague, it wasn't specific at all. Like, he's going to be a this and oh yeah. I mean, some of them are really wild. And I think Ian McCaig scared himself a little bit with what he came up with. But you will see pieces sometimes in these books. And like you said, it's a bit confusing because you assume, this was something that was almost in the movie, or something that J.J. Abrams or whichever director we're working with came up with themselves. And oftentimes, no, it's the artist just throwing something out there.
Or playing with the concept a little bit to see, is this a path we want to explore more? And sometimes, especially like in The Rise of Skywalker, what I loved reading about was the snake, and how like there was a lot of snake concept stuff done, and then it was cut, and then it was back in, and so they had to blow that out to actually be a full creature design too. So there was like a lot of passes through whether something was in and out. And to me, it showed like the Rise of Skywalker art of book just shows me so much more than I think the other ones did, just because of like how you focused on the departmental contributions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
sorry, I'm gushing.
No, I appreciate it. And it's interesting. Sometimes the seed of an idea comes very early on, but it hasn't quite found a home yet. And that was very much true in The Rise of Skywalker with like the horse charge. Like, that was one of the very first things that they thought of, because it's such it's like a very Rick Carter kind of concept, like a high concept without a home per se, but something they know they want to have in the film, and just finding the moment for it. And the snake was another one, because in early, I don't know if it was in script drafts or just outlines, but initially Rey encountered the snake while she was training on Agent Kloss, not on Pisana. It would be a similar kind of setting up the healing kind of thing. It served a story purpose, but just in a completely different location. And but eventually it finds its home in the story. There's tons of examples of it's like they know they want something, but they don't quite know how they want it and where they want it. And that happened quite a bit in The Rise of Skywalker. Well, the Oracle is another great example of something that was kind of thought of very early on, and then in and out of the movie, and in and out of the movie again, and then finally out of the movie, unfortunately.
But then out, because yes.
Well, you can even see concept art for that moment in ILM, which tells you, in the ILM section of the book, which tells you how close it got to being in the film. Because once ILM is working on something, then it's like, that's an example of something that is truly almost in the movie.
And I think there was some like behind the scenes creature shots, like of the creature department too. Where you can actually see like little models and stuff.
Yeah, I remember seeing those. Yeah, like on the workbenches and stuff.
So it was definitely thought of and like had been, moved forward in the like production pipe, but it, ended up just not working.
I know Neil Scanlon has talked about, it was shot. And it was just, and as described in the book, Neil talks about how it's just this huge silicon pour, the biggest one that they've ever done. And they only have like really one chance to get it right. There was a giant hand also that emerged from the water and stuff.
Oh my God.
It was, the Oracle, the purpose of the Oracle was just to kind of lead Kylo Ren to Exegol and give him the Wayfinder. The hand would come up out of the water with holding the Wayfinder, and Kylo Ren would get it that way. But as just a means to an end, as a way to get Kylo Ren Exegol, it was just more efficient editorially to just have him find the Wayfinder much more quickly in that one shot, and then boom, he's off to the races. So I can't, I don't honestly know why it was cut, but hopefully we'll see it.
I don't know. It was weird and weird and Star Warsy to me. I thought it was really cool. I like the concept of it.
I like my Star Wars weird. I'm always advocating for the weird. Like let's get weird with Star Wars. George was definitely never afraid to get weird, but I think in that case it wasn't like, it was too weird. It was more.
It's more time.
Just for time.
Yeah, and that's a struggle too. Like there's sometimes really cool things that you can do if you have enough space joke to breathe with the story. You can do weird things, but if you're short on time, like things have to go. Things do have to get cut because that's part of the movie too, and what you end up with could be significantly different than what you tried to do, but it is part of the game, is to try to create something, and editing is one of the hardest parts of any movie, I'm sure. Cutting out all the wonderful creations.
They always say like kill your darlings in editing. It's a really painful process for filmmakers, but it's what needs to happen. More is not always better, I would say. There's been a lot of talk about that lately on film Twitter and various places, and people wanting longer cuts of movies and stuff. And I can understand that impulse. I know people were also, I don't know if they were disappointed, but maybe a little surprised to see how the length of the episodes of The Mandalorian, for example, or the final episode of the Clone Wars, for example, people just wanting more. And I can understand that impulse as a fan myself. But, trust me when I say that we're getting the best versions of these things in the length that they are.
Yeah.
More would not necessarily be better. Like, it's also about just pacing and efficiency of storytelling. And you can watch a 5-minute student film, for example, which I did quite a bit of when I went to school, in various little student film festivals and stuff. And a 5-minute film can feel like 3 hours if it's, poorly constructed and poorly edited. And then, like a film like Seven Samurai, which is, I think, over 3 hours long, 3.5 maybe, you just want more because it's so brilliant. And in spite of its length, it's exactly the length that it needs to be to tell the story best. And I would,
the Mandalorian episodes like bounce in length too, and same with the Clone Wars season 7 episodes. They change in length a little bit more than what was directly TV translatable because of the fact that they were premiering on Disney Plus. And I was like, it'll be interesting to see what happens over time with film creators and whether they play a little bit more with episode length than the strict 22, 23 minute limit.
It's exactly. No, it's completely liberating streaming. And even cable channels that don't have to adhere to that strict. I've been watching Better Call Saul, and some of the episode lengths are just all over the map. And of course they still have advertisements. There's probably rules around that. I don't know, but like definitely streaming services really free these filmmakers to make things exactly the length that they need to be to tell the story the best.
Yeah.
I mean, theatrically, there's limits because you want to get a certain number of shows in a day, and you don't want a movie to be too long because that'll limit how many times it can play on a screen.
I'm gonna devil
Whereas,
advocate this
on
entire
Disney,
conversation in the moment, which is that sometimes constraints make filmmakers make things, or artists make
yes,
things better, because with guidelines or with bars, you have to be more creative with how you do the end product, right?
exactly. No,
It's a
and yeah,
balance.
you'll get no argument. It's a balance, yes. You'll get no argument from me on that front either. I mean, there's truth to that. All that to say that, just in my humble opinion, more is not necessarily better.
Yeah.
I didn't see earlier cuts of the Mandalorian episodes, but they just feel really right to me, and it's great that those. I mean, there's definitely constraints. You're not going to see, like, obviously just randomly
3
there's
hour
half-hour episodes, and then all of a sudden there's like yeah, exactly. That would be like, what the? But yeah, no, and I do agree though that those limitations do, especially in editing. I mean, the ultimate example of that is the first Star Wars film. That movie is just a masterclass in editing.
Yeah.
And then my understanding is they sometimes went right to the frame before the camera cut out, like before it, so they were literally looking at every single frame to craft that film into the masterpiece that it is. And that team of editors is just amazing, legendary. But so yeah, editing obviously is a huge part of Star Wars history and behind the scenes work. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic.
That's okay. It's a discussion, but I did want to give you an opportunity to like clarify for people, especially if they get kind of down the rabbit hole of the art of books and kind of expect things to have been a particular way. What are the warning labels that like you wish you could put a sticker on and be like, here, read this art of book, but care with.
Yeah, something. Yeah, and I know that not everyone follows me on Twitter, and I'm not saying that everyone necessarily should, but
well, you should, because he posts amazing art that's not always in the books, and
that is true. That is true.
You talk a lot about movies.
I do.
Really cool.
Yes. Yeah, and I just try to keep it kind of in the box of what I enjoy, which may be a little selfish, I guess, but I guess that's what Twitter's for, though. And but anyway, yeah, I mean, the big thing is obviously, and we were just talking about this, that just because you see a piece of art in an art of book doesn't necessarily mean it was almost in the film. And you see a lot of film website articles that say that very thing, like blah 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 was almost in The Rise of Skywalker, and definitely not.
Yeah.
Some of them were. I mean, obviously, the Oracle is one that we can say was very, very much almost in the film. But there's a lot of stuff, especially from the early days, and that's when one of these books is laid out chronologically, that becomes quite clear that that thing never had a chance. But then when I mix up the layout of these books, and I try with this book especially, I tried to make a point. There's that one section that shows kind of Supreme Leader Kylo Ren with Rey by his side.
Yeah.
That art, and I put a caveat in the book just to make sure it was clear, like, this was from the very first months of the production. This was before there was a script or even an outline. And the artists were just kind of going off on, in their own imaginary, what this relationship, what this space could be. Yeah. So, so that's really the number one thing is the artists are free to pitch ideas. There's no person standing over their shoulder while they're drawing telling them, no, a little more red. No, it's like, it doesn't work that way. I mean, these guys are world-class designers. And, of course, when the production designer or director wants, have something specific in mind for them to draw, they'll get a design brief and be told, okay, I want it to be like this. And sometimes the filmmakers have something very specific in mind. But in the early days, it's often very wet cement, and the artists are free to just create. And you'll see a lot of those. I try to include as many of those actually as possible in these books because they're fascinating to me just as a fan. I mean, I'm often thinking about like what I as a fan want to see. If I was buying one of these books, like what would be fascinating.
There's a
And
lot
so
of
I tend to
white space to
gravitate.
fill in that moment, right? Like there's like all the what ifs and
Indeed.
the alternate
Yeah.
universes and all of that stuff. And it's much what like fans themselves do once they've
Hmm.
seen that previous movie. They're like, oh, where is this gonna go? And it becomes almost like a speculation
Yep.
round. And so, I appreciate that, what we saw was a lot of what fans were like, whoa, would that be cool if that happened? And yeah, some
Hmm.
people even thought that, which is kind of cool that like some fans were like this. And they also saw that artists who contribute to Lucasfilm art also were thinking that direction. I mean, the end up script
Yeah.
was responsibility for JJ Ontario, but
Yeah.
yeah, there was definitely a, hey, this could have been a path. Yeah.
And that's the thing also with our films and these decisions. I mean, sometimes people wonder like, oh, is it kind of safe for this kind of art to get out there because it fuels kind of speculation as to like what could have been. But one person's favorite idea or character might be another person's least favorite, just as one person's favorite film might be another person's least favorite, or vice versa. And Lucasfilm has a tradition of sharing behind the scenes from the very beginning. I mean, when I was a kid, they aired those famous behind the scenes documentaries on the original trilogy. I think they were on PBS for me when I was a kid, and it was just blown away. And I love that kind of
Even now we're
openness
getting the
that George always
gallery.
had about like,
The
yeah, no,
gallery of The
and I'm loving
Mandalorian.
it. Yeah, it's such a
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that openness is important because I don't think it kind of dispels the magic, especially in Star Wars, because it's always been a part of it. And the innovation that was always there from the beginning is important to document. Like what ILM did on that first film was mind blowing. There was nothing like it prior. The technological advances, especially with motion control, which gave such a kinetic energy to the shots. And the dogfights in space, like there had never been anything like that before. And now we kind of just take it for granted. It's such a part of film history and film language now. But yeah, I think it's, and I feel the weight of that responsibility too, to document the design innovation that's happening moment to moment as these films are being made. So yeah, no, I think it's, some people might look at an idea or a piece of art in here and be like, oh, I wish that was in the movie. But that's fine. I mean, it's all part of the conversation that's ongoing about Star Wars amongst the fans. And then, like I said, like another fan might love the film perfectly as it is, and that's just that's just storytelling, and part of being a fan is appreciating something more than others, making your list. The films you love, the films you don't, and it's and sometimes that changes over time too. Like upon reflection, it's like me. I mean, I saw episode 1 back in '99. I think theatrically at least like 6 or so times, and it's now grown to be my favorite of the prequel films.
Mine too.
Which it took a long time to get there,
It has everything Star
love...
Wars in it. It has everything Star Wars in it. It has
Yeah.
balance. It has light and dark. It has conversations about symbiosis, especially from like a Zen Buddhism perspective. There's so many cool things in that movie. And if you just get caught up on, I don't know, if you just get caught up on kind of some of the more Georgian things,
I love that term, Georgian.
then he has a particular style about him, and you catch it if you watch THX or you watch American Graffiti. You understand how he thinks, and so I have this whole total conspiracy theory. I will tell it to you, and then you will laugh at me, and then you'll be like, "Oh my God, Marie Claire, what are you talking about?" But either episode 4 of The Mandalorian is the absolute best homage to George Lucas that Dave Filoni has ever written, or George Ghost wrote it over the phone with him, because it feels like a George Lucas production. And I have several reasons for it, specifically the use of humor, specifically the racing that happens in the desert, the droids, the overall feel of the conversations that happen, it feels very George. So either Dave was doing homage or they were like chatting over the phone writing it, because it feels so George Lucas when they go to Tatooine.
Yeah.
That's my...
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of funny though, because it's the person that really wanted to bring the Mandalorian to Tatooine was John.
That's so weird.
John,
oh
for John, the first movie is it. Like, and he loves the rest of Star Wars, obviously. But for him, that first film was his bread and butter as a kid. And by the time he saw Jedi, he was, you know, he was a little older than me. So by the time he saw Jedi, he was already like, you know, working in a movie theater, like a teenager or whatever. And it was probably like kid stuff. And he was like, meh. For him, yeah, that first film especially. And he just loves, and there's really nothing else like it if you think about it in that original trilogy, especially like just really bathing in the culture of a world like you do on Tatooine. You're there for like half of the movie. Like I at some point I was looking at the Han Solo in the cantina scene and realizing like, wow, the movie's almost halfway over and we're just now meeting Han Solo. It's kind of nuts how long we're on Tatooine for.
To the Empire and to the Princess, but you're really in that plot of, you know, Luke meeting his mentor and not deciding to go and then deciding to go and like going through all of his psychological stuff. You're right.
And there's no other world that's explored in that way in that film. Like Yavin 4, we barely get to know the Death Star. I mean, it's just kind of like a floating machine. You know, there's really nothing like with that kind of cultural and, you know, I don't know, you're just really getting to know a place and getting to know what Star Wars is, like getting to know what's so unique about the approach that George made in that first film, which is like, it's shot kind of almost like in a documentary style where it's like, everything's just real casual. It's like, you know, people are dropping references to things like the Clone Wars that had not yet been defined, but they're talking about it like we talk about, you know, McDonald's or whatever, you know, like it's just a part of their world, you know. Well, McDonald's is kind of probably a bad example, more like, you know, like Vietnam or something, or, you know, the Vietnam War. But, you know, just really feeling what it feels like to be in Star Wars, you know, to be a person that lives in that world. Yeah, you're just kind of like peeking, getting a glimpse into, super immersive. That's a really great way of putting it. And so it was John who really, you know, loved that, and he wanted not necessarily to be on Tatooine in the first episode, but John wanted that first sequence in the first film on that ice planet, whose name I'm forgetting, but he wanted that to be on a desert world because he so loved Tatooine. And they switched it because then, you know, Dave was like, hey, if we're going to go to a desert planet, we should go to Tatooine, and I'll put it in my episode. So that's really the origin of that.
That's cool.
Which is interesting.
It still felt very George in like the racing and all
for sure.
aspects. It was like you thought about what George would do going to Tatooine, and you did.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, you know, Dave worked with George for so many years, and, you know, still, you know, when he gets the opportunity, shows George what he's working on. And obviously George was down on the set of The Mandalorian, which was awesome. And so, really Dave, and I like to think myself, carry a little bit of George with us wherever we go within the company, you know, having worked with him so closely. Dave more than me, of course, because he started Dave started right, I think his first week was when Revenge of the Sith was still in theaters, if I remember right. And I started in 2008, so it was a few years later. But still, you know, when you work with George, you just start to absorb all that he knows, and it's, you know, it's now just fully integrated, obviously, into who Dave is, and his amazing little not speech, but at the end of one of the episodes of Disney Gallery, The Mandalorian. I think it was the third episode, where
talking about the Phantom Menace, and then also like how to make things, I don't know, feel that way, and why it's important to me, especially Star Wars, to be uplifting. That was just awesome.
Yeah, and that's Dave 24/7 when he's in the office. You know, like such a valuable part of everything that we do. And yeah, we're really lucky to have him. I'm not sure where I was going with all this. I got off track.
Know. It was fun. I don't know. Tatooine is kind of like this weird holy land. So like anytime somebody goes there, like it means something. And it's cool to find out that it meant something to Jon Favreau.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He saw it when he was, I think 10 years old, originally. And that first film, and it just blew him out of the water. And then he went back and watched American Graffiti, which informed his love of like hot rods and 1950s culture and all that stuff that got integrated into swingers, and THX 1138 obviously as well. The films of George Lucas. I mean, I like to think of those as the original trilogy. It's like THX, American Graffiti, and the first Star Wars. Like those three films, are super important to who Jon is as a filmmaker.
That makes me happy because there's so much Star Wars in THX, like so much.
Oh yeah,
like just the concepts,
Absolutely, yeah. No, I've often thought of it, and I think this actually did this come from Jonathan Rinzer? It might have. That in so many ways, THX is like the Empire, and American Graffiti is like the rebels, the rebellion, and then Star Wars is the fulfillment of those two things coming together. Which is kind of a fun way to think about it. Yeah.
So I do have a couple of questions kind of by art book. And, as we're kind of talking about them, I'm probably not going to go into Solo so much because I actually don't own it. I need to because it's my daughter's favorite Star Wars movie.
Oh, wow.
Which is
pretty
cool. She's 12. Yeah. She loves Enfeet's Nest and Kira. Oh, my God. Like, the whole story she loves so much. It's the one that we watch the most now because she's like, we're going to watch Star Wars. I'm like, I guess we're watching Solo because it's the one that you love. But it's interesting because it hits you, like these stories like hit you. And she was just the right age. She was 12, right? So she's 12 now, but she was 10 when she watched it. And so it just like hit her right at the time.
Yeah. And there's a lot of truth to that. Like, depending on
8 to 12,
a lot of people.
That's the age.
It is. Yeah, it's a lot of people were that age when the Clone Wars came out, and a whole generation, and then others it was the prequels, and then people like me it was the original trilogy. Yeah, exactly, Rebels or this sequel trilogy, or like you said, Solo or Rogue One. Or The Mandalorian. There's probably kids who are seeing Star Wars first exposures to The Mandalorian.
That's my son. He is. If you ask him, he is Baby Yoda's dad. So I know that's the child, but he calls him Baby Yoda because he had a Yoda Zoom Zoom from the Disney store like a million years ago. They're like little pillow. They look like little potatoes in a way, but it's
I know those.
The size of a pillow, and it looks like Yoda. And that's been his baby for years. And so when the Mandalorian adopted this, child Yoda, he died inside. He was like, this is the fulfillment of my dreams. Yeah. So. You never know how it's going to affect kids. You never know, what is going to be their thing. And he's talked about getting the armor. He's talked about, getting one of the babies. We're still trying to figure that all out because things are not shipping to Canada as quickly as other things. But, it's all right now.
Yeah. These days, we're all
everything's
affected
slow
in that way. But no, yeah. Understandably so. We all got to be a little more patient than usual.
But so the Solo amazing. One is the one that I don't own. So I apologize about that. But I do.
That's fine. That's fine.
In this sequel trilogy, as we're kicking this off, in the TFA book, you actually talk about guided imagery, and
right.
It's something actually that's used in psychology to help people kind of get to what's underneath that whole, what are they trying to get to? Can you talk a little bit about what that was and how that happened?
It was really driven by Rick Carter, who was the co-production designer both on The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, and was there. If you read The Art of the Last Jedi, he also worked with Rian Johnson and kind of did a similar. Rick's kind of a mystical guy himself. He's kind of like a bit of our Yoda over the last 5 or 6 years, and he really wants to kind of tap into the subconscious of these creators and also just tap into what's personal for them. and not only the directors and the writers, but the concept artists as well.
I think
So,
also Kathleen Kennedy was involved in some of the early stuff too. Like I think you mentioned.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like everybody was like,
for sure.
Let's do this.
Yeah, I mean, it really was like, let's dream together. Like, let's imagine what Star Wars can really be and be free with it. Like, let's just explore in a way that is kind of like tapping into the subconscious. And that was really important to Rick because he felt like that's, it's something that actually that a favorite filmmaker of mine, David Lynch, talks about in terms of using meditation as a way to be creative and find ideas. And it's a similar process. But Rick does it in a way that's not like, having everyone meditate. It's, he'll have a meeting, art department meeting, where he was often down at Bad Robot with Kathy and JJ and Michael Arndt and Lawrence Kasdan and Kiri and all these people working together to craft this story back in, this would be in 2013. But then he would have these art department meetings, these kind of epic, I mean, some of them would last, 2 hours. Well, they would actually typically last at least an hour, but sometimes 2 or more. And he would be the whole time talking, and the artist would be kind of half listening, half sketching in their sketchbooks as he was just kind of talking his way through it in a really off the cuff, organic way, literally for like hours, just Rick kind of like talking and talking and talking. But it was I saw it happening. At first I didn't quite understand it, but then I kind of got into the groove of it. And it's really like he's lulling us all into somewhat of a hypnotic state in order to kind of drag ideas out of our subconsciousness. It was fascinating to me. And that is precisely how Rick works. And it's not something it's like not a kind of a nuts and bolts thing. It's not like, oh, you throw money at a project and then you get results or whatever. It's much more of like kind of an organic, Rick's part of, I think he went to school at Berkeley. Like he's part of that generation, the 1960s, where it's like, you find ideas in a way that's, more organic. And so, yeah, it was fascinating to be in those meetings. And I would actually, I wish I could take a time machine and go back to that point because, and we'd often have people like Dennis Murin would pop in or John Knoll to contribute. And actually Dennis Murin was the one who came up with the idea. What could the First Order do, who weren't even called the First Order, I don't think, at that point yet, but what could the bad guys do that would be terrifying? Like, what could their weapon be? What could their, goal be? And he was the one who came up with the idea of, like, them wanting to turn the lights out, like plunging the universe into literal darkness. And that's when the idea of Starkiller Base was kind of born, something that could, take the energy of a sun, extinguish that, and then shoot it out as a weapon. Turning off the light, effectively, and that's a real base kind of fear of all creatures especially humans, is fear of the dark, and losing the light. And then the metaphorical, obviously, what that means in a more metaphorical sense. So yeah,
in
those
the
meetings
meta
were just
spiritual aspect of the universe too, with the light side and the dark. It's like,
Precisely.
literally they're sucking the light side out just to create the darkness.
Exactly. And it was fascinating to see, that process in motion. And sometimes it was a struggle. Sometimes Rick would literally be calling on each one of us in that room and being like, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Just trying to, like, and sometimes it was like pulling teeth because you just hit a block and you're just like, I don't know. I don't have an idea. I don't know. And it was, but then other times it's flowing and a brilliant idea just comes out of nowhere. One of the big turning points, I think, for The Force Awakens and for the sequel trilogy in general was the point that summer of 2013, when Kylo Ren, or as he was called then, the Jedi Killer, and that was just like a nickname. It was never going to be like his final name or anything.
Yeah.
When you don't have a name yet, you just call people, whatever. And he was just known as the Jedi Killer. And but for the longest time, he was just baddie McBad guy. Like, he really wasn't defined as a character outside of just being bad and someone who kills Jedi. And then he became that summer Han and Leia's son. That was not something that was there from the beginning. And that when that shifted, it just elevated that character through the stratosphere. It was like, okay, now we really understand where this whole...
Yeah, the stakes are there now.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we understand the shape of this trilogy and what's happened in the intervening years. Everything just plopped into place suddenly with just that one idea. And that's something that Rick is just a genius at drawing out of writers and directors and artists. And yeah, so I just continue to feel so grateful for Rick's presence over the last 6 years, and just a lovely guy too. And, just and an amazing, career. With,
it's interesting
Avatar
to hear, like,
and Jurassic Park and Forrest Gump. I mean,
and it feels like, that ideation is how, say, some of that worked, like it was like cycles of ideas to say like, hey, let's get these things out of us and actually onto paper.
Yeah.
No,
It was being in the art department at that time, I just feel so lucky to have had that experience and to see that kind of, it's really like a bit of a magic trick that Rick created. It's amazing to see in real time.
And we've talked a lot about the chronological, like movement through the book, through The Force Awakens art of book, because you can actually see kind of how things developed and like how, you didn't know what Daisy looked like. You didn't know what Poe was like. You didn't know, and so these things like transformed over time as especially casting happened and you got closer to dates and you knew who was going to be playing different roles, and the whole what if was kind of open at that point. Yeah. So like, you mentioned like Rick worked with Ryan and Rick was production design on The Rise of Skywalker, but how did the like ideation process change for each movie? Because it's like suddenly you have a previous movie.
Right.
And you have a,
And I think some people may have felt a little, in a weird way, disappointed with the art of The Last Jedi, in the sense that it wasn't like the art of The Force Awakens.
I don't know.
But the process, that's, it's weird to say this about your own books or whatever, but that's my favorite of the ones that I've done. And I've mentioned this elsewhere, but yeah, I mean, I was really inspired by what Josh Cushins did for the art of Rogue One, kind of bouncing off of that for the art of The Last Jedi, and taking more of a dive into the filmmaking process than I did with the first. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, there really wasn't different filmmakers, different processes. It's never going to be the same journey twice. And definitely The Last Jedi, the journey with that was very different because Ryan didn't have the same challenges that JJ had and Rick and Kathy and everybody on the first film. Ryan had different challenges because he had to do a sequel. It's a totally different thing,
Yep.
And what was also different,
you have a starting point, and you have a place where you probably need to end up.
Exactly.
But what happens in the middle?
Exactly. Yeah. So it was just a different process, and so there wasn't going to be a period, like a blue sky period, like there was with the first film, because you don't need to kind of set the tone and come up with all these wild ideas, especially with, and Ryan talked about it in the book, in the interview that I did with him. Just how easy the story came to him, which he says was very unusual for him. Like the writing process for him was actually pleasurable and fun and easy, which is, as any screenwriter will tell you, is extremely unusual. Usually it is like pulling teeth coming up with a story for a film. And effectively, like Ryan's rough draft is what The Last Jedi is now. I mean, it really did not change a ton. So kind of out of the gate, the designers knew what they had to do, what they had to design. And it was just about iterating on those ideas that were already a part of a script, which was more or less in the can.
Yeah.
So it's by its nature going to be a different book. I mean, I would have, if there was kind of all this wild ideation and stuff and blue sky artwork, I would have included it in the book, but there wasn't any of, there's some exploration, of course, within the designs that the artist needed to tackle, but it's just not the same process as with The Force Awakens. So that was a big shift.
Well, you do have some of the art that was created for TFA that, like, especially, like the death of Han Solo, on the bridge and stuff like that. And there's like this weird note of like, and I've seen it a couple of times, but like the number of red lights. Is there something special about the number of red lights?
Like the specific number?
Yeah, like it was just like a note from one of the artists that said, like, especially in that scene with yeah, like Kylo and
Hmm.
Han on the bridge. There's like a
Right.
note saying like we have to be really careful about the number of red lights.
Oh, I think that's more about like not wanting to define it. Like, I think they were just trying to evoke some of those similar kind of endless chasms from the previous Star Wars
Right.
films, and just having the frequency. It was probably more about the frequency of lights and not having it be distracting, or making sure that was in within the Star Wars
Because
language.
there's a
I
lot of
mean,
red
that's all I
lights
could
in that
really
scene.
imagine that it being.
Yeah, it's just
Oh yeah, well,
it's
and
just
I
like a
love
really
the
interesting thing.
yeah, no, and that's like, talk about Rick Carter. I mean, the whole thing of the light shining on Kylo
Yeah,
or Ben and
extinguishing.
his father, uh, yeah, going out,
Yeah.
and that being the moment when the situation turns, and then of course the light of the lightsaber being red on both of their faces suddenly when he lights it. I mean, so very symbolic and dramatic, and I mean that whole. I mean, I really love that scene. I mean, as it's weird to say about something that's so tragic, but
It's
just in how it's
important.
crafted,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's pivotal, and just how JJ held that moment and just paused the film really for
Yeah.
quite a long time there, which is the two of them looking at each other. I thought was such a brilliant choice and so dramatic and sad. Like these two people kind of seeing each other after a long time, and you feel that at a certain point that Ben would have made a different choice, and then this, like I said, the light went out and
Yeah.
the dark side kind of crept in, and he made the wrong choice. But he, at one point, it felt like he was willing to go with his father and throw all of this nonsense away. But then, the light goes out, and that's obviously symbolic of the light extinguishing inside Ben. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, what were
I,
we talking about?
no, just I don't know. I threw an offhanded thing about lights out there, and
Oh
then
yeah, yeah, no, no, no,
we got
and,
really deep into
no,
symbolism, which I love. Thank you.
yeah, no, of course, and no, I remember now. Yeah, just in the art of the Last Jedi. I mean, I really, I love that was something that I pitched. I mean, that I brought into my initial layout, was bringing some of that artwork that we couldn't include in the
Hmm.
first book into the second book, and then likewise with the Last Jedi into the Rise of Skywalker book, because
So,
I just
is there like a compendium that we could
wanted to
get
share
for the
that.
Rise of Skywalker that like wasn't
That would be
included?
great. I mean,
Like
something
the
that, yeah.
part B. Because
Like
like
part
now that the book is out,
two,
like that was one of the
volume
main
two.
problems is like some of the
Yeah.
art kept on leaking, stuff like that, and like I think
Hmm.
one of the art of books leaked beforehand to one of the terrible sites. That's one of my things is
Yeah.
like I'm like I want to see the movie in how it's meant to be seen and then look at
Hmm.
all the stuff. Like that's my thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. No. One thing I can say is that StarWars.com did an article about, I think it was an interview with Jake Lund Davies
mhm.
after Solo came out. Excuse me. And he shared some of his Maul concept art, which wasn't able to be in that book, because obviously that was a big surprise that we didn't want to
So it
spoil.
might come
And all
out.
of this, leaving
Yeah.
stuff out of the books is, just not wanting to spoil it, because there's
Exactly.
always a possibility that art can leak, and obviously, and it does happen obviously from time to time. So, so yeah, we just want to hold things back to really preserve that theatrical experience for the fans, just in case something leaks, and that was certainly true with this book. But hopefully, it'd be great if there was an article on StarWars.com, for example, that had some
Mhm.
of that Palpatine art. But I can't sit.
Yeah, I was actually happy you delayed it, or it was delayed until
Mm.
March, because then there was like like less chance of things going out there and being in the wrong.
And it still happened anyway.
I know, I know.
But
You can only do so much.
I mean, one thing. I know. Yeah,
You're not
it's one of those
responsible for
things. But
keeping the safe closed.
no, no. Thankfully, no. But yeah, I would not know how to even begin to do that. But yeah, we definitely try to include as much as we can, but there are
Yeah.
limits. And what a lot of people don't realize is that these books go to print. They're at the printers, and out of our hands like 6 months prior to their release date. And so these books, these Art of the Rise of Skywalker books that everyone has, were printed 6 months before December, not 6 months before March.
Hmm.
So there, it's not we didn't like throw out the old book and create a whole new book. I mean, that's not what happened. It was just delayed. So yeah, I mean, and that limitation also limits what we can include. I include as much ILM concept art as I can, but then there's a whole bunch of art that's created up until like just a month or two before the film comes out. ILM's cranking away on art, as long as they need to, and it's usually quite a long time before the film comes out. So
let's recenter on one of my favorite like additions to the Star Wars universe, which is Ahch-To Island, and how it feels like, again, it feels like Prime Jedi. It feels like the start of where you would go if this was the start of a religion or a start of a spiritual path. Like you walk up those Jedi steps and you're suddenly like in this island that feels like there's darkness, there's light, and there's also, a lot of spiritual symbolism all over the place, as well as like, a lot more feminine natural power than I think we'd seen in anything else except for The Mandalorian. There's lots of interesting stuff happening in The Mandalorian, but like, with the Thalassiren, the caretakers, the symbolism of the island, just talk to me about this. It was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what's happening, not so much, but a lot of what's happening on Ahch-To as a place is a function of Skellig Michael as just a location. Obviously the steps were there. They weren't like put in by the production crew, and there's limits to like how much you can shoot there just time wise within a year, or weather wise. Just it's off the coast of Ireland, and it's a pretty wind whipped and weather beaten location. So and there's limitations when the puffins that live on the island are nesting or breeding or whatever. There's limits to what you can do. But regardless, just the physicality of the actual location itself lends itself brilliantly to its need within the film. But then also all the things that Ryan needed for his story, because we only get a glimpse, but it's such a beautiful symbolism at the end. It's just such an amazing, it's not a coincidence, but it's just amazing how it all worked out. Like where you dock your boats to get on Skellig Michael is like where the Falcon was parked at the base of those steps, and then you walk the steps, and the symbolism of that, obviously going on a journey upward, ascending, is and then John Williams' music at the end of The Force Awakens as Rey climbs those steps to her destiny to Luke is just such beautiful symbolism. And that's one of my favorite pieces of John Williams' music, actually, is the Jedi Steps, is the end of The Force Awakens. So I think it's just, to get emotional when I hear it, like almost every time. It's just like really powerful stuff, and symbolically powerful stuff. But then, of course, as you said, like as a function of the story, it's like Luke being on this island for so many years, he kind of needs to be, it's a reflection of Luke needing to live off the land while in isolation, so I think in that way, it just happened to be a place with a lot of symbology, like you said, something more feminine, something that was
like caves and inside of trees and ocean and like there's just but it was naturally into the island. And then we have the sea cow concept, which I love those 2 pages, because you like talk about like what are we gonna do, and and it ends up being like a lazy boy guy on a sofa style, but just also cool, and you're like, nope, there's definitely milk, so we got to do with udders, and
and I love that, like, we're getting to see how Luke survives, and that the island has to kind of feed him and nurture him as a person to be able to continue to live in this isolation. And it's funny, like you just meet Luke like Rey does, and you're like, okay, I guess he's just living here and stuff. But then when you go on his day-to-day chores, and seeing how he survives, you just get a totally different kind of feel for Luke's life in isolation on this place, that he's not alone, but he's kind of, he's not making any great effort to leave, but he's also communing with this place. And then when he shows Rey how to connect with the Force, through the Force, she's seeing different aspects of the island, and how it does have the light and the dark in a way that's very much like Dagobah is for Luke and Yoda. And I love the Mirror Cave. I think that's that's something that makes Rey's journey on the island really different than Luke. Like Luke's not kind of trying to figure out who he is per se, in like a literal sense at all. Well, he doesn't really discover obviously that he's the son of Darth Vader until that film. But yeah, I just love the idea of this ocean cave under the island where the water is polishing this stone until it's like a mirror, and then all the reflections of Rey. I mean, that's one of my favorite sequences in any Star Wars film, kind of in any film. I mean, it's just an amazing thing, like Rey plunging into the mirror and looking back and seeing all the reflections of herself behind her, and then getting to the end point. I mean, it's just talk about symbolism. It's just like, really beautiful stuff, and just so beautifully filmed, and the snapping and everything going down the line of all the rays. It's
like technological innovations with that to actually achieve that moment was really cool too, to actually see how they managed to get that done. It was really but like just the idea of it, the concept of seeing every version of her, and then eventually it comes to an end. It was really cool.
Beautiful stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like a poem, searching for meaning, searching for identity, really great stuff, and done visually, so economically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Without dialogue and without exposition. Yeah. Really.
Until you actually have the voiceover, which is itself is a trick, which Ryan is so good at, tricks like visual or filmmaking tricks to make you go, oh, she's talking to Luke. Oh no, she's talking to Kylo Ren. Oh my God, which leads into one of the most explosive scenes eventually.
Literally, yes.
Both emotionally and with Luke exploding stuff.
Just great stuff.
I just, I think that visually and symbolically, like Star Wars is filled with this stuff. And as you mentioned, like what are some of your favorite like things that are either symbolic or symbols within Star Wars?
Actually, one that jumps to mind because of The Last Jedi and the island is the tree, the library tree, which, just touches so many different projects within Star Wars, because when they designed the library tree, and it's pretty subtle within the film itself, but they were definitely inspired by the shape of the rebel symbol for the tree, and maybe that was the origin point in universe Star Wars history. Going back to that library tree might be the origin point,
and the fact that it burns, then it looks like the rebel symbol
exactly
when it burns,
and then it being on
the firebird.
The Firebird, literally on fire. And that's starting with Sabine Wren in Rebels, and her Firebird graffiti, which then is combined with Saw Gerrera's Onderon Rebel symbol to form the final Rebel symbol. It's just great stuff, and it's obviously that didn't happen in sequence; that happened kind of haphazardly, and it's so great when all of those things can kind of link up going into the films themselves. And obviously into animation and various other things that we've been doing. Oh, and also that it's a new Neti tree, the tree that's in the Jedi Temple courtyard, which is something from Shattered Empire. So it finding its way into the comics as well. It's just pretty great, that connectivity and that symbolism, and how it can take different forms in different stories is really cool. I love that kind of stuff, that connectivity, and also just how a symbol can kind of resonate across projects and have different meanings. Whether subtly or more overtly, is pretty cool. So yeah, that's one that I definitely think of. Oh yeah, and like a big one for me too is, and this is more going into the kind of the world of colors, but something that I really love from the very first film is the difference in color, especially between C-3PO and R2-D2, and also shape. That like C-3PO is like a human figure, obviously, and as a protocol droid, it makes sense for him to be able to relate to people. But his gold color kind of blends in on Tatooine, which is a world of people, and the natural worlds. He's like a kind of a more natural color, like not so much the shininess of the gold, but just the kind of yellow tone, versus something like R2-D2, which is, he's not black and white, but he's blue and white, and he blends in more as something that doesn't have a human form and doesn't have that kind of color that 3PO does. R2-D2 blends in more in a world like the Death Star because he himself is more of a machine, in shape and color. You could have just imagined that R2D2 would be plugged into a wall somewhere on the Death Star and no one would blink an eye at him, that he would, there's just another astromech droid rolling around. Whereas C-3PO sticks out like a sore thumb in a place like the Death Star. And just putting those two characters together and how different they are, and it's a very kind of Abbott and Costello thing, It's like a comedy duo. One's tall and the other's kind of short, and and he's giving R2 a kick every once in a while. Is very much kind of in the same tradition as comedy duos going back.
Well, I like that R2 sees everything and records everything, and C-3PO is the one who speaks but doesn't acknowledge anything hardly at all.
Well, yeah,
or remember anything.
Yeah, ironically, 3PO is the one who's always talking, but he's really not saying very much. And R2 is on top of the situation always. He's the one who's got the information and is the true hero of that team. The one he's always off on a mission, and 3PO's running after him to keep up. So yeah, a really great little duo. So perfect, and obviously bouncing. George was bouncing off of the two peasants in the Hidden Fortress. Yeah,
very much so. And you get the sense of their relationship, especially when you watch Hidden Fortress. That it feels like that, and like especially how caught up in the moment, because C-3PO speaks for the audience in a lot of ways when he
for sure
when he comments on things. He's like, oh, we're never going to get out of this. It's like like that's the anxiety of the audience feeling that in that moment.
Exactly. Yeah, this is madness. 3PO freaking out as any of us would in this. Definitely speaking for the audience.
Yeah. So in The Rise of Skywalker, moving kind of forward, you also show some of the end of The Last Jedi, which is the big fight at the end, which this caught me. Like, I didn't see it coming. Some people were like, oh yeah, I totally saw it coming. I'm like, I did not. I was like, that was so smart after it happened when Luke is not actually there.
Yeah.
Even though we had an entire movie of people not actually being in each other's spaces talking the whole time. So it makes you feel stupid, but also you're like, dang, that's brilliant.
Yeah. No, I mean, what I loved most about that was it was Luke not compromising his principles, but still saving the day. It's like having your cake and eating it too, in a way that I just think it's like Luke using the Force to blow up the Death Star in the first Star Wars film. It's just like, and having, well, I mean, even more so, it's and Michael Arndt has talked about this, I think, in presentations he's given about writing for film, and just how brilliant that the end of that first movie is, because it's not only the fulfillment of Luke's kind of character in the sense of him finally kind of letting go and using the Force to be the hero, as opposed to just relying on technology, which is a really important kind of moment. That the Force is real, like Luke realizes really for the first time that the Force is powerful, the Force is real. And in that, like 2 seconds earlier, like Han Solo comes out of nowhere and fulfills his destiny to really be a hero for once, and not, just take the money and run. And having those two moments be linked, and that without Han's intervention, Luke wouldn't have made it. And you kind of forget all about Han, like it is, like, because you're so wrapped up in the battle and stuff. And to me, the moment with Luke at the end of The Last Jedi is a very similar, just such a great leap of imagination for Ryan in that script.
Like
just really great storytelling.
Many ways he like saved Kylo Ren's soul from more damage in that moment. I mean, what he chose to do after that with that, but he prevented him from doing another murder, from adding more to his soul, and that's all through the dialogue and everything like that. But it's beautiful, and from a psychological Jungian perspective, Kylo is projecting all of his hate onto his uncle, who is literally a projection, which is hilarious.
Yeah, and the fact that
smart.
At this point in his life, Luke will not raise his sword to fight his nephew. Like, he will not do it. And I loved, that he's just kind of dodging and weaving, and he's not going to, I mean, some fans might have wanted to see Luke versus Kylo Ren in this big battle, but I don't think that would have been true to Luke's character. Yeah. And it also wouldn't have been true to Luke's character for him to leave the island, to really leave the island. Projecting himself's one thing, but he was able to stay on the island and remain the peaceful Jedi that, I think, this is just my own interpretation.
Yeah, if Luke is exactly what people think he is, which is like, in a way, like this force nuclear weapon out there, he's not going to leave and be tempted to be that. He's going to find another way. He's going to find a way that is the most Jedi thing that he can do, which is save as many lives as he can and still prevent people from, doing the bad things that they were intending to do.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Which is and really relevant to the times today. That you can have an impact and still, stay true to your principles. And not become that which you hate. Which is just really powerful storytelling and a powerful lesson for fans. So it's great stuff.
Talked a lot about kind of the weirdness of the Oracle, but I also really love the idea of Dark Rey, and I know that it's very similar to Dagobah and the tree in Dagobah. But do you want to just talk about kind of the iterations and like how did she come about?
I think originally there was that an idea of a Dark Rey. I mean, obviously, as soon as JJ realized, bringing the idea that Rey is obviously the grandchild of Emperor Palpatine into this story, the idea of a Dark Rey, whether real or a vision, was something that was probably going to be a part of this film. And I mean, in the sense of even Rey projecting into the future and seeing herself as such. And
there's some Empress Rey stuff. There's different versions of her.
I mean, one that I really love is Glenn Dillon did an illustration of just her kind of scavenger costume, but in black, as opposed to what we saw in the film. And that's kind of interesting. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to put it in the book, but I was poking around and there was Callum Alexander Watt, who did a lot of amazing costume work for The Rise of Skywalker. He did some versions of Dark Rey where it's like Empress Rey with a headdress. So there was some headdress design work.
Like similar to like Padme kind of?
Not dissimilar to, very, that's actually a really good connection that I hadn't even thought of.
I mean, like, because Palpatine was Nabooian, like a Nabooian person.
I know, and a lot of people forget that. Yeah, that Padme and good old Sheev are from the same.
So like Rey is from Naboo. Like that is. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, for sure. Biologically.
Of Naboo, yes. So that's actually fascinating, and there was some headdress, costume ideas that they were playing around with. But I guess ultimately, and as with a lot of design work, like kind of keeping it simple and making it visually clear is always paramount with Star Wars. And Doug Chang's talked about that in his presentation that he gave at Celebration last year, where it's that like 3-second rule. You want to see something and understand it. And seeing Rey in robes that are very much of the Emperor Palpatine, helps you kind of grok instantly, even before it's revealed, even before her lineage is revealed. Helps you to really understand what we're talking about here, what we're dealing with here, and what Rey's fears are, like who she could become if she takes a step down the wrong path. So, so there actually wasn't a ton of iteration done for Dark Rey because I don't think it was ever like a massive part of the film. But it's still, I mean, they played around with a few different ideas and I think landed in a place that was the most visually clear. And I can't wait to see some Dark Rey cosplay. I'm sure there's going to be a ton, at our next celebration, whatever that may be.
Some people were doing it even before like The Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, yeah.
They thought, this could be a thing that happens.
Yes.
It's like that blue sky, not blue sky, but like more like white page, like where does it go next? And people were really exploring that. And it was more like, again, that dark, her scavenger wraps with darkness or like red, they a lot of people explored it and would show up. Like I think Molly Damon from Star Wars Explained.
I've seen her cosplay. Yes,
had a really good one. Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said for the collective subconscious in that way. That like and that ideas just resonate as strongly with the fans. I mean, you want to have some surprises and some things that are unexpected when you see Star Wars, but there are just some ideas that resonate even before they show up in our films.
Because they feel Star Wars on such a, I don't know, unconscious level now.
Precisely.
That some things just are meant to happen. Like I said that early on when I was speculating, I said the Emperor will want to combine powers with Rey. And like weirdly, I was right. As weird as that was, but he wanted that. And I'm like, that's the reason. That's the only reason you want like a character like Rey's, because she's powerful and you want that. Like that's so I mean that it's just stuff. And I hope that the creatives aren't like shying away from doing their own ideas and following their paths, because like we're speculating out here in the in the world.
And to be honest, like exactly. And the designers, I mean, I'm really kind of plugged into the fandom just because of these books and because of my presence on Twitter and stuff. But a lot of these designers and filmmakers are not as plugged in as I am, and oftentimes purposely avoiding, not wanting to, be too influenced by a lot of chatter and ideation that's happening amongst the fans. But I mean, obviously, that's a huge part of being a fan as well. Fan fiction and cosplaying and all that stuff is been part of Star Wars since fan art, big part of Star Wars since the very beginning, and important part of just the fun of it, just like exploring like what ifs and what you want things to be, and it's important and something that's a lot of fun to see. And I mean, the cosplaying, when we go to Celebration and seeing all the fans, I mean, it's just amazing the work that they do. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I mean, I know how the real things are made now, because I've been having to do so much research for these books and just following along. But it's just amazing, the skill of the fans and their artistry and their talent and their ideas and stuff just consistently blows us all away. It's great stuff to see.
I love it when people take an idea and it's like, that's not actually a costume, and you actually get to see it made into a costume. So my favorite was somebody went as Acto, and there was also like thalasirens, like full thalasirens. Like, some of them were like just different versions carrying around like bottles of green milk. And like, I just love it when the fans like take something and then make it like transformed and livable. And that's what I got to see at Celebration this last time. So that's
I also love
awesome.
Some of the cosplays are like amazingly deep cuts too. Like a bunch of people went as the boom holding guy, pink shorts guy,
who unfortunately lost recently.
I know. I was about to say, which is really sad. But it's the creativity there is just so fun. I love snapping photos of cosplayers, of course with permission, when I go to Celebration. So,
another part of the Rise of Skywalker book that I just loved the exploration of, because it touched so many different aspects, was the Festival of the Ancestors and the Aki and their culture. Because like you have a lot of like conceptual stuff, like this is going to happen, but then you have creatures and you have costuming and you have, a little bit of like, how is this going to happen? What is going to happen? How are you going to make it happen? Especially in the, ILM and computer aspect of the later aspect of the production. But I loved all of the different aspects of the Aki, and they're like called like elephant people or elephantine people.
Yeah, like elephantine alien. Yeah.
But like it explores all these different things, because like through the crowd they're wandering around, and however long they're there, they have to see all these different aspects. So you kind of go, I think there's this 1-2 pager where you can actually see the festival, and it's like these giant long tubes. I was like, that's really cool. That's just a cool way to show stuff, and you end up getting kites and explosions of color and in the end production, which is also really amazing.
And that's what's cool. I mean, that was mostly driven by Jake Lund Davies, who's just an amazing designer in the creature department. And not everything that he illustrated for the Aki ended up in the film. There's only so much time, but it just feeds into the sense of their having a rich culture and wanting to explore that as a designer, even if it doesn't equal like a one-to-one thing that you see in the film, I think is really important. It's like defining who these people are, and that informs the designs that do end up in the film. So yeah, I mean, he shows like how an Aki kiss and the games that they play with each other and what an Aki child looks like, and the puppet show and their, the little things that they sell at the festival and all the, and even just how their hands move and their facial expressions and things. It just makes something which is essentially a background thing so much richer, And I think that is the essence of design. It's not just about making something look cool, but it's about exploring it deeper and making it relatable and making it rich and making it believable. It's not just about,
immersive. Back to our point earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that you feel like you're in a real place, and that it, and George was so brilliant at that, and it's so great that tradition continues and that the artists are supported in that sort of exploration to really give these creatures and characters and worlds a resonance. That's as meaningful as Star Wars should be, I think.
So you there is a lot of color theory that happens in Star Wars, and also Star Wars itself kind of has its own color rules.
Yeah.
What do you look for when you're thinking about color? Like, for example, that blue lightsaber of Luke's originally, and we find out was Anakin's earlier on in the second trilogy. That blue is often associated with the light side.
Yes.
And red, that stark red that is of Darth Vader's lightsaber or Kylo Ren's lightsaber, and Palpatine's lightsabers. That's the dark side. Like, what are things that are Star Wars from a color perspective, and like, are there rules that you have to pay attention to?
I think the basics of it are pretty basic, in the sense of, I think George is really just coming from a place. It's like, it's very much like in the Western tradition of the good guys wear white and the bad guys wear black kind of stuff. And that 3-second rule again of like being able to identify a faction or a location or a character by their color or their shape or their, and it has to be something that just reads easily to the audience, because the movie's not going to slow down. And as Doug said in his presentation, you're not going to, George told them, you're not going to be there to explain it to the audience when they're watching the movie, like that's, because Doug would explain it to George and say like what, why he made the choices he did. And George would be like, that's great, but you're not going to be there to explain it to them when they're watching it. And so it needs to be something that reads, that is understandable and understandable quickly. So, I mean, yeah, obviously the colors of the dark side, black and gray and white and red, are symbolic of their rigidity. Well, and the red, of course, is just kind of a, it's the color of blood, it's just something, yes, exactly. So things that are scary and things that are, but I mean, especially, that the dark side and the Empire are mechanical, and that's a symbol that George was important to George to kind of convey in THX as well, versus the organic and the natural, which is the light side. And the Force in general is in all living things. More naturalistic colors and neutral tones. And Star Wars generally is pretty neutral. It's not like it's not like Guardians of the Galaxy, like a Jack Kirby-esque kind of comic book world, Star Wars. It's pretty naturalistic in its depiction, like it really wants to, and in that way is very relatable and feels like our world, but not. It's kind of like something that resonates with us, but with a twist. It's like, okay, and George talked about that even as far back as like 1975, and that interview he did with Charles Lippincott, who we also just sadly recently lost, where George was talking about what the aesthetic of Star Wars is, and I quote that interview in the introduction to the Art of and that it's about the designs kind of blending in and just making sense, and that you don't dwell on them. The camera's kind of not going to sit there and show you like, oh, look at this cool thing. It's not about that. That's not what Star Wars is about. It's about like the meaning and the characters and movement. It's not about like holding the camera to focus on like, oh, look at this amazing thing. It treats everything very casually, because to people within Star Wars, everything is casual because they see it every day.
Fly casual.
And it just precisely. So yeah, it's just a different way of approaching filmmaking. Well, a very different way of approaching science fiction. Although I would argue that Star Wars isn't science fiction at all, but it's definitely a different way of approaching genre filmmaking than the science fiction films that preceded it. Maybe outside of like 2001 or Planet of the Apes, you might be able to argue, but it's just that everything doesn't feel super designed, and it just feels natural and real, and it doesn't call attention to itself. And that's definitely, and color wise, just being very basic, like Princess Leia wears white, Darth Vader wears black, you kind of, and as well, especially for that first film when there wasn't so much kind of nuance in, who Darth Vader was yet, like the reveal of him being Luke's father kind of changed him as a character.
Yeah, George even broke his own rules with the Phantom Menace, and
for sure.
How Queen Amidala looks and takes up space visually, and they focus on her, giving her tons of time, like way more than 3 seconds, because of how important and integral she is to the story. Like the camera like soaks her up, because like we needed to become comfortable with who Luke and Leia's parents were for the older generation, and she resonated quite strongly with many young girls at that time.
Oh, for sure.
So I don't know. I think there's a place for breaking that rule.
Oh yeah. Well, and again, I think we were also bathing in the culture of Naboo in that film.
Yeah.
And it was important to do so because of the two characters of that world, Padme and old Sheev, who then become such important parts of Star Wars history, and so it was necessary to kind of dwell in Naboo and explore it and highlight it in a way. Yeah, and George was definitely breaking his own rules for the prequels in many senses, and I love the risks that he took with that film in particular, as I mentioned earlier. So the Star Wars aesthetic is an interesting thing because it's sometimes a bit hard to define, and it does change over time. Well, not change, but it allows space to grow, and it's great that George was so willing to play with that as Star Wars continued.
I absolutely love that we got a reintroduction to amazing women, powerful women in dresses in Last Jedi, and you got to see some of those iterations, especially in Canto Bight. You got to see amazing, fabulous dresses, like lovely.
Yeah, just pure fashion, like fashion in Star Wars, like.
Yeah.
And I mean, talk about your challenges. I mean, just like, what is formal wear in Star Wars is like, huh? Like you never thought you'd go there, but Ryan went there, and Michael Kaplan, I think, just knocked it out of the park. It's amazing. It felt seamless to me, Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the sort of stuff that I'm like, I want to see more of that in the world, because it just creates more of that, I don't know, visual experience. And everything can feel a little beige in Star Wars because it equals out to be this kind of neutral. And having these extremes of fashion built out in there, even how fabulous Sheev looked in The Rise of Skywalker when he changed his clothes. He did a quick change.
He did.
But it creates more for the fans. It creates more for the universe. It just expands things out. So I think that's also one of the reasons why Padme is so special to many fans, is that there's just so much to dig in there and love, and
it makes sense for her character, that if she's royalty or a senator, she's going to have some pretty fabulous clothes, We
got a bit of that with Kira,
versus someone like Luke, who's a farmer. He's going to be wearing the same thing every day, And,
yes, he's a farm boy. But Kira, we also got a little bit of that too, which is awesome. Yeah.
And again, she's someone of high standing. She's someone who it's appropriate for her character. And yeah, but it is interesting though that the people of Canto Bight, it's black and white again, and they're villainous, in the end of it, and that's what Finn doesn't realize at first, and Rose kind of shows him, is that and that is, and that is an interesting. I actually never thought of that before. Just that they're in a way a reflection of the Empire of the First Order, in their black and whiteness, and and what a great choice it was for Ryan to keep Rose and Finn in their resistance gear and have them kind of stick out.
We would love to have seen them dress up and see that.
I know, and that would have, and I love that.
It does the contrast well, right?
It does, and it shows that they don't belong there. That they're people who have, transcended that kind of narrow-mindedness that the guests of Canto Bight, who are profiting off of other people's misery, that they don't belong in that world, and in fact those people are pretty wretched, should not exist.
Exactly.
So
my last question before we wrap this up and sign off, because this has been an amazing conversation, is we often see unused art from concept or from design brought back into the universe, and like Ralph McQuarrie's original small droid became Chopper. Like that's one of my favorite little things, and the whole aesthetic of Rebels was really taken from Ralph McQuarrie's original design. What is one thing that either you've published or you've seen published in one of the art of books that you're like, I hope we get a chance to see this?
Ooh, boy.
I know you know things, but I what do you love that you're like, we didn't get to do this, it would be cool to see it sometime?
Well, one thing I loved, and I've mentioned this before, but one thing I loved that they explored briefly was the idea of returning to Coruscant for the Rise of Skywalker.
Rise of Skywalker and the wolves. Was that Dave Filoni's idea?
It was not. It was not.
I wanted to know, because the dark side wolves, because they had the red and the black, they were cool.
Yeah, no, I to the best of my knowledge, Dave was not involved, as surprising as it is. You'd think it would be, but we all know how much Dave loves wolves, and wolves are amazing. But it'd just be fascinating to see what's going on in Coruscant in the sequel trilogy time frame. But I also understand the choices that JJ ultimately made, that there's limits also to what you can do in a place like Coruscant, as far as he couldn't have this Sith homeworld. It couldn't all of a sudden be Coruscant. He couldn't have a big arena with all these chanting Sith or whatever, just whatever under the Jedi Temple. That wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense. So, but at the same time, those visuals and those ideas of this, that Coruscant's abandoned, and there's dust in the streets and wolves roaming the streets, and it's what happened? Is are interesting questions to ask, and
considering how many life forms lived in it. And it was this planet-wide city, and we're very familiar with it from Clone Wars now, and from the prequel time. We're very familiar with this location, and it made and we go back there a lot with the comics and with the other media. So I agree, it would be really cool. And we know roughly that the Senate and the center of the Republic was moved, but we don't really know what happened to it. And it's just, I love the contrast. George did it himself in the original trilogy with Cloud City. Cloud City was kind of the original Coruscant in a way. It's the first Star Wars urban location that we went to. So just the contrast of that, because we go to so many natural worlds, in Star Wars. Just the contrasting that with a urban location is always kind of a fun way to kind of, I don't know, just set our characters in a different environment and see how they interact with it, and stories that you can explore in that kind of space that are different than a world like Dagobah or Tatooine or Naboo even. Although Naboo has its city, of course, but it's a different kind of city, than Coruscant.
And it is a world that's more connected to the natural world and more kind of in balance in that way than a place like Coruscant. So,
yeah, we have Coruscant,
interesting. Yeah, no,
Cloud City, and Canto Bight. Like there's one kind of in each, in each trilogy, and you're right.
And each one
it has different things that it speaks to.
Yeah, different potentialities within the storytelling in a location like that for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be great to see what's going on in Coruscant these days.
Coruscant, you up?
Exactly.
Well,
so I guess, yeah, hopefully we'll get a chance to explore that someday.
Phil, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thanks for coming on the show and talking all about the art of books and your work and what you love about Star Wars, because you're a very passionate fan too.
Indeed, yeah, no, and it was my pleasure. To talk about Star Wars with a fellow fan is what all of us fans live for, So
yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you again. And where can people find you if they're looking for your Twitter? All of your books are out there. You can buy them from pretty much any book retail store if you can get to a store, or if, online, etc., if they deliver.
Yeah, and a lot of independent booksellers in, a lot of towns and cities
need them, yes.
Yeah, and they're doing curbside pickup now. So you can, if you'd rather not order from a big online retailer, there's other options out there for you. So and yeah, my Twitter is at Phil Szostak, and that's SZOSTAK. A bit hard to spell, but it should be too hard to find me. And otherwise, and yeah, I'm on there quite a bit, posting concept art and just continuing to share all the things that I love about Star Wars.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We'd like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Susan, Brad, Anna Perez, Macau Mom, Neil, and James. Make sure you like and subscribe on your podcast app of choice or on YouTube. Leaving a 5-star review on iTunes helps other people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or on our website, whattheforce.ca. We also have a new Discord. Links are available in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.